Why did the greatest civilization in Greece suddenly decide to tear itself apart? Simple. Because Athens and Sparta absolutely could not stand each other. After defeating Persia together, they looked at their former ally and thought, that guy seems like the real problem. At the time, Persia was the biggest superpower on earth. Massive armies, massive territory, massive confidence. Looking across the sea at Greece, the Persians saw dozens of tiny city-states constantly arguing with each other and assumed conquest would be easy. The problem was that Greece wasn't one country. It was hundreds of independent city-states. Everyone had different interests, different governments, and different grudges. If there was one thing the Greeks loved almost as much as freedom, it was arguing with other Greeks. When Persia invaded, something remarkable happened. Athens, Sparta, and many other rivals worked together. Against the odds, they defeated the Persian Empire and protected Greece from foreign domination. It was an incredible victory and the beginning of a completely different problem. Athenians celebrated like heroes. Festivals, victories, speeches, and endless bragging rights. After all, they had helped save Greece. And naturally, once people start believing they're heroes, they often begin believing they deserve a little extra influence too. The Spartans celebrated differently, by which I mean they barely celebrated at all. While Athens threw parties, Sparta continued training soldiers. Their idea of fun was probably an extra military drill before breakfast. To guard against future Persian attacks, Athens proposed a new alliance called the Delian League. Members would contribute ships or money. Athens would lead. On paper, it sounded fair. In practice, things would become a little more complicated. Soon, alliance money began pouring into Athens. Gold, silver, resources, and ships arrived from across the Aegean. The treasury grew larger every year. Athens promised it was all for collective security. Some allies were not entirely convinced. Athens slowly discovered that having access to everyone else's money was surprisingly enjoyable. New buildings appeared. Fleets expanded. Influence increased. The alliance began looking less like a partnership and more like an empire wearing a friendly disguise. Some member states eventually tried to leave the Delian League. Athens responded with a simple message: no. And when diplomacy failed, Athenian warships usually appeared to explain the situation more clearly. One rebellious island quickly learned an important lesson. Joining the alliance had been optional. Leaving it was not. Other members watched carefully and decided that maybe staying was the safer option. With enormous wealth flowing into the city, Athens transformed into one of the most impressive places in the Greek world. Temples rose above the skyline. Trade flourished. The city became richer, stronger, and more confident. Part of that money helped build magnificent projects like the Parthenon. Athenians admired their achievements. Their allies sometimes looked at those same buildings and wondered why alliance funds seemed to be funding Athens. Meanwhile, Sparta watched all of this with increasing concern. The Athenians kept growing stronger. Their navy expanded. Their influence spread. And from Sparta's perspective, none of this looked particularly reassuring. Spartan society was completely different. Athens loved debate, trade, and democracy. Sparta preferred discipline, military training, and simplicity. They weren't just rivals. They represented entirely different visions of society. Athenian children studied philosophy, politics, and rhetoric. Spartan children trained to become warriors. If Athens and Sparta were modern schools, one would teach economics and law, while the other taught survival training. Athens gathered citizens into huge democratic assemblies. Everyone wanted to speak. Everyone had opinions. Sometimes it probably sounded like thousands of people arguing simultaneously, because that was exactly what it was. Spartan government was much simpler. Fewer debates, fewer speeches, more direct decisions. Spartan leaders often looked at Athenian politics and wondered why anyone would voluntarily make governing so complicated. Across Greece, other city-states became increasingly nervous. Every year, Athens gained more influence. Every year, Sparta grew more suspicious. Many Greeks began worrying that a collision between the two powers was inevitable. One of the most worried states was Corinth. Corinth was wealthy, influential, and closely connected to Sparta. Unfortunately, Corinth and Athens also had a growing list of disagreements. Corinthian leaders repeatedly complained about Athenian behavior. Trade disputes, political interference, naval competition, there always seemed to be another issue. Every meeting produced more frustration and less trust. Trade routes became a major source of tension. Whoever controlled important sea lanes gained wealth and influence. Athens and Corinth both wanted advantages, and neither side was particularly interested in compromise. Then another city entered the picture, Corcyra. Corcyra had problems with Corinth and urgently needed allies. As often happens in international politics, local disputes quickly attracted much larger powers. Representatives from Corcyra arrived in Athens seeking protection. They argued their case passionately. If Athens helped them, the balance of power might shift dramatically. If Athens refused, Corinth would benefit. Athens decided to support Corcyra. To Athenians, it seemed strategically useful. To Corinth, it looked like direct interference. The situation immediately became far more serious. Corinth reacted with outrage. Diplomatic tempers exploded. Angry speeches filled council chambers. Every conversation seemed to make relations worse rather than better. Across Greece, alliances began hardening. States started choosing sides. Neutrality became increasingly difficult. The political map slowly divided into opposing camps centered around Athens and Sparta. Fear spread faster than facts. Rumors circulated. Worst-case scenarios multiplied. Leaders began preparing for dangers that had not yet happened, but increasingly seemed possible. In Sparta, influential voices argued that Athens had become too powerful. If action wasn't taken soon, they warned, Athens might become unstoppable. More aggressive Spartan leaders pushed for confrontation. They pointed at maps, listed Athenian actions, and argued that waiting only benefited their rival. Delegates from across Greece gathered to discuss the crisis. Every state had complaints. Every state had concerns. The meetings were tense and emotional. Athens defended its actions. Its representatives argued that their empire provided security and stability. Critics replied that empires always claim they're helping. Corinth delivered particularly passionate speeches. They accused Athens of aggression and warned Sparta that hesitation would be disastrous. Behind the scenes, military preparations quietly expanded. Fleets were maintained, soldiers trained, supplies accumulated. Publicly, leaders discussed peace. Privately, many prepared for war. For a brief moment, compromise still seemed possible. Diplomats searched for solutions. Messengers traveled between cities. There remained a chance conflict could be avoided. Unfortunately, distrust had become deeply rooted. Every proposal was viewed with suspicion. Every concession seemed dangerous. As tensions rose, many Greeks sensed history approaching a turning point. The old balance of power was breaking down. Spartan leaders held critical debates. Some favored caution, others demanded action. The question was no longer whether Athens was powerful. Eventually, the advocates for a tougher response gained momentum. More Spartans concluded that delaying conflict might make future conflict worse. One final round of negotiations failed. Relations continued deteriorating. Both sides increasingly believed the other posed a serious threat. Then came the decisive moment. Sparta formally moved toward war. Delegates reacted with shock, concern, and resignation. Across Greece, armies mobilized and fleets prepared to sail. Athens and Sparta stood at the head of rival alliances. The Peloponnesian War was about to begin. But before we begin, only a tiny percentage of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy history explained with maps, animations, bad jokes, and questionable life choices made by ancient politicians, consider subscribing. It's free, and unlike joining the Dalian League, you can leave whenever you want.